Testing 1.
Testing 2.
Testing 3.
Testing 4.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody to the Test Him Fertility podcast.
Another Testing 4 expert in the house.
Absolutely. I'm proper happy about this episode. I'm really excited about what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Welcome Emma Whitney to the Test Him podcast studio. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming all this way to
There's
visit our
not
studio.
loads of anticipation about how exciting it's going to be. But yeah, sure.
You know,
Let's not oversell it.
We have fun.
Yeah, no, giving up your Saturday morning as well. Here we are on a Saturday.
Committed to the cause.
And I think you
absolutely.
really are. I remember when we first met a couple of years ago, I came to the Eve Well Open evening. And this was right at the beginning of Test Him. We barely got started. And I was like, I don't think I've met anyone else as passionate about this subject as you. I was absolutely blown away. I mean, bless you. You were, I think I kind of had you pinned in a corner, like just asking you loads of questions.
You're not moving anywhere.
Yeah.
So, I need to absorb this information.
Yeah. But no, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, we're going to talk embryology. What happens the other side of the hatch or the wall?
The absolute magic of the
Yeah,
fertility
it
clinic.
is where the real magic happens, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Well, I'm not going to disagree.
no, of course not.
So
Otherwise,
like
I'd
Life
definitely-
begins.
Yeah.
It is.
But let's kick off with what is embryology? Because you're an embryologist, right?
By trade, I'm an embryologist, yeah. So about 20, gives my age away. 21 years ago, I started training as an embryologist in the NHS. And an embryologist essentially is, we're probably going to use the word gamete quite a lot. Eggs and sperm are your gametes. And we, as embryologists, handle gametes. We handle eggs and sperm, we turn them into embryos, we grow embryos, we freeze them, we thaw them, we biopsy them. Anything that goes on once the gametes have left your body is in the hands of the embryologist, no one else.
Wow.
Very special hands, right? Because
Very special hands.
Very
Careful.
stable hands, unlike Toby's.
yeah, we've had a disaster this morning.
Just setting you up for that.
Not sure what's wrong with me today, but yeah, you're handling some absolute precious goods.
It's really
right?
funny. I'm actually really clumsy. no, seriously.
I remember you saying that to me
I'm
before.
really clumsy, but in work, maybe that's why I'm so clumsy. Because in work, I'm not.
Basically,
and it's
you
like
contain it
you
all at
are.
work.
You do. You have
Yeah.
to. I mean, but actually, at home, my husband looks at me and goes, "What on earth? You've just tripped over that." And I'm like, "I don't do this at work." But yeah.
Well, maybe it's a slightly tidier space. Not that I'm casting any aspersions on your home, but
No, my home, definitely not a tidy space. But I suppose it's also it's very clinical, very set out and everything, and it's your mind's in a very central place when you're in the lab.
So how did you get into it? We had a whole story from Claire Mooney that involved dung beetles. Did your journey?
No, mine didn't involve dung beetles or bumblebees or anything of that. So it's interesting, but not as probably as funny. My mum, interestingly, left school when she was 15, and when I was nearly 15, she decided that enough was enough, and she wanted to have a career. So she went back to university, went back to get her GCSEs, went to university, and she became a midwife. And not only was that incredibly inspiring to watch someone with grown-up children take back control a little bit as girl power and all that, and my sister followed her into midwifery, and I realised that wasn't quite for me, but I was absolutely fascinated by reproductive medicine. So, I mean, what do they say in world? It's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And thankfully, I was quite lucky to meet Michael Dooley, who was a fertility expert, one of the first fertility experts. He was working alongside my mum as an obstetric and also doing fertility gynae. And I ended up doing some work experience. And I'm one of those people that knew what I wanted to do when I was 15, and I designed my entire bachelor's and master's degree based on going into embryology.
Wow.
Thank God I like my job, because it would have been really bad.
Yeah.
So at 15, you knew.
That's really unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
15 years old, there's the whole world ahead of you, and you've made that really
Yeah.
obvious
Strong
choice.
vision,
yeah.
isn't it?
It's fascinating.
And has the path followed as you hoped and planned at 15 to where you are now?
No.
No, I mean, it never
not
does,
even a
does it?
little
I don't know
bit.
why I asked the
Anybody's
question.
life. No. It's
I mean,
always
university thankfully went well. I got my master's in human reproduction, and I managed to land a job as a trainee, which anyone trying to get into embryology now will know it's an incredibly challenging job to get into. It's it's very sought after, and the training routes have changed quite a lot over the years. But so it certainly wasn't what I expected it to be. But if anything, sounds really cliched, it's a little bit more magical. It's incredible. It's incredibly stressful. It's an incredibly hard job. we're very aware of what we're doing every day. There has to be humour, there has to be music in the lab, because otherwise it can all just feel a little bit overwhelming. You are literally holding everyone's hopes and dreams in your hands, and it can be very, very overwhelming. But we're quite good at what we call the in and the out. So when you're in and you're very supported and you're in a really tight team, and when you're out, there has to be out. You have to be away from it. We can't work 10, 12-hour days. It's just not, it's not possible with the stress levels. So
it must be quite a heavy environment at some points, especially kind of. I was very lucky to spend the day in a clinic many years ago, and like the fertilization check in the morning. Kind of, I mean, it's very different now because of embryoscopes and what have you. But there's that moment of, okay, we're checking to see what's happened overnight, and then the phone calls that have to happen after that, and that must be so hard. It's like so you've got everyone's hopes and dreams. Like there in a dish or in an embryoscope, just sitting, doing what they're doing, and you've then got to, relay that information to them.
Yeah, I'd say the phone calls are probably the hardest thing to train in as well. I think you can sort of train people in the day-to-day, the embryology, but the emotional element, everyone behaves differently. Everyone, obviously, we're
So
humans,
unique, isn't it?
so unique. So I still, to this day, after 20 years of doing this job, hate making phone calls. Interesting enough, my worst phone call is when embryos haven't grown rather than when they haven't fertilised. I think there's an element of understanding that that's a possibility, and I think there's a real misconception that embryos not growing in the lab is also a possibility, and that's probably the hardest phone call that we have to make.
Yeah, but I think that's because like once you've got you might have like 8 embryos that have successfully started. And there's that huge hope then for a couple, isn't there? You sort of think, oh, we've got 8, that's great. And then if they've not developed, I think, like I said, I think that is a harder piece of news to get, isn't it? Because it's like, well, you've built up those 3 days of hope to then 3 days later have a phone call to say, oh, it's not worked out, whatever it is.
So that probably leads us on to what we were going to talk about, which is the role of the embryologist in the whole journey. So we actually do consultations with our patients before they start treatment, because it's incredibly emotive, those 5, 6, 7 days where you've got no control, because you had control up to the point where your eggs were collected, because you were doing the injections, you were doing the scans, you were turning up to the clinic. That bit where you hand everything over, there's so much anxiety around that week that what we like to do is speak to our patients beforehand to map out what that's going to look like. When are you going to get phone calls? When are we not going to phone you? We actually don't phone our patients between day 1 and day 5 because of what you've just described, the roller coaster of information. Telling someone on day 3, amazing, you've got like 8 growing really well, and then phoning them up 2 days later and bringing them crashing down. That's just mean. So if you can manage everyone's expectations and say, look, there is so much that goes on with embryo development between day 1 and day 5 and day 6, and I have stopped trying to second guess embryos. I used to be like, yeah, I know what's going to happen. I have no clue. No. Because they look like they're doing one thing and they're doing another. And now we have, like you said, we've got time lapse. They're under camera the whole time. We're monitoring them. But how much information you then share and put people on that roller coaster is it is a very personal choice. And we will obviously call people if they want it. But I think if you describe to someone that actually there is nothing I can tell you between day 1 and day 5 that's going to change this outcome, and I'd much rather speak to you with certainties rather than guessing. People really get that.
And it's all about that education right at the beginning, and as you said, managing expectations, because it's such a difficult thing. And it's like one area of medicine, I suppose, where it's not like a normal sort of procedure that you go in for, because you're actually, yes, you want a positive outcome, but it's one of those areas which can be really negatively destroying if you don't manage people's expectations, their education, and really the outcomes of that, and managing the outcomes of that, of the results that you're likely to impart. So incredibly important job, isn't it?
Yeah, so we speak to people before they even start, because once you're in, it's quite hard to take on that level of information. Once you're in, you need to sort of set the scene before, and also you need to meet us.
I was going to say, because that's quite a rarity to hear that the embryologist meets the couple. I would love that on our journey. Yeah,
because you're quite unusual in that sense, aren't you? That you are so actively involved in patient care and that relationship and that conversation, whereas I think for a lot of couples, like I say, stuff goes through the hatch, or through a door or whatever, and that's it. They get a phone call, but that's all. So I think that's really unique what you're doing, and it must be really well received, I would have thought.
Yeah, definitely. And also it's if you think about a fertility clinic, we're a huge multidisciplinary team. And the stress on its own has to be shared. But ultimately, the information should be sought after from the experts.
Yeah.
We are the experts in embryology. Yeah. I've never really understood why doctors give information about embryos. It's something I felt really strongly about from my whole career. So having that voice and being in a place that allows you to be centre focus in a patient's journey is well received from both sides. It actually also helps with the embryologists feeling much more empowered about their day-to-day, because otherwise you can... So in context, most embryology labs are in basements, and that's all to do with vibrations. I could go on about that all day, but I won't. But there's a reason we're all in a basement. We don't have windows, and we can be down there all day doing quite stressful tasks. And so it can feel like you're just a cog in a wheel unless you're really involved in the journey. So from a human focus, running a team of embryologists, it's really important to me that my team feel empowered and involved and as important as they are.
That's really nice.
It is really nice. I mean, it's really nice sort of feeling that you are working together as a team, because you don't sometimes see that in some of the other clinics that I've been through over the years, working with closely in the labs and so forth. And it does make a big difference to the trust and the respect that couples coming into your care really need. They need that little bit of extra care and understanding what's going to happen, who's responsible, and who can I talk to. And sometimes you just need a little bit of reassurance along the way, and to have that right up front and know who your team is that's going to be looking after you and your gametes and various other things is so important. So yeah, well done.
Does it potentially get a bit samey for an embryologist? Like, say you're all kind of down in a basement, and this may certainly, I wouldn't have thought is the case in your clinic because of the way you work. But if you're in a big clinic as an embryologist doing, a couple of thousand cycles a year or whatever, is it like, okay, put the sperm here, put the egg here? Does it get samey for some people?
Yeah, it can do in the right or wrong setting. I don't know how you want to describe that, but yeah, especially in the bigger places. I mean, I was at a clinic that did 3,000 cycles a year before. And I spent nearly 15 years there, and it was an incredible experience because I was exposed to so much and I learned a huge amount. But yes, it can, without the patient contact and without knowing who's at the other side of those eggs and sperm, then yeah, it can sometimes feel quite hard and cog-like, just churning over, which is why I always wanted to make a move into something where I could make a difference into people's. So I'm a massive, as you well know, advocate of mental health, and I actually believe that IVF is a scientific journey. It 100% is, but how you cope with that scientific journey is all to do with what education you receive beforehand. Because actually, I've seen people come out of years and years of trying with proper PTSD and anxiety. I had my own difficult route to parenthood for different reasons, but I do know that the understanding of what was happening made it more able to be understood and cope with. And I think that we have a responsibility to protect the mental health of our patients. There's no point putting someone through 5-6 rounds of IVF and making them a parent if at the end they can't parent because they're absolutely traumatized by the experience. So, and we all have a responsibility for that, not just the doctors, not the nurses. We all have a responsibility to educate our patients that this is going to be how it looks and take away that anxiety and that shock element. And you just unfortunately can't do that sometimes in huge clinics because the time dependency just isn't. You just don't have the time. And I suppose it is. And I think it's probably personal choice about how much input and involvement you want, but it definitely feels like the landscape is changing and patients want to be educated. They want awareness.
They want a better quality of life through that experience. It's a very traumatic sort of time in anyone's life when, you're faced with difficulties, and let alone needing to give that responsibility to somebody else. You have to trust that process. You have to trust, the knowledge that somebody is going to have your best interests at heart and try and give you the best options available to you. And even if you know that it's going to be really difficult and you're not getting the outcome that you desire, is being able to manage that afterwards as well, so that you're getting that emotional, mental support in order to sort of say, okay, let's think about what's going on, what's happening, what are the reasons for it, because then you can sort of process it a little bit easier, and then say, okay, should we stop? Should we do another thing? Should we think about other options rather than trying to keep doing something that's not actually going to be, as successful as we would like or would hope to achieve. So
yeah, because I think the thing with couples is that when you go to an IVF clinic, you don't want to be there in the first place.
No,
you wanted to have a baby naturally. That's what we all just believe will just happen. You're kind of at a last resort getting to an IVF clinic. I remember friends of ours saying to us that were aware that we were going to IVF, saying, "Oh, that's fantastic! You're going to an IVF clinic. You'll have a baby." Bloody hell, I ain't. I don't want to be here. And it's really refreshing to hear your approach and the fact that your involvement, like the fact that there is like a genuine care for the couple, that they're not just another paying client, another round of IVF, another cycle, another implant, etc. Like, it's really refreshing to hear this. It really is.
And we've seen it on the support groups that we've been running, through testing and before. That sort of mental anxiety about that whole process is often due to the fact that they've not really understood or had enough awareness or education about the whole process. And this anxiety really does exist in guys as well as it does in the couples and the women. And we've got a duty to try and help them, haven't we? Really, to process that information and support them along the way. And sometimes that's just emotional support, not necessarily medical support. But yeah, it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's quite like you said something about it being a scientific journey, and that's something that I remember from our IVF journey, is that like having a baby for us in our heads was a moment of romance, a memory, and pregnancy, baby. And here you are in this really clinical environment where all these really professional people speak this whole new language that you're just literally feeling like a rabbit in headlights of. And all you really want is just to sit down with them, have a cup of tea, and go, "What the bloody hell's going on? This is really hard. Like, where do we go? What is this normal for me to feel this way?" And just have a general conversation.
But it's also about you knowing and so this is where the Instagram stuff came from, because it's all about you knowing what questions to ask, because actually most people haven't got a bloody clue what questions to ask.
Exactly. I have no idea.
So if you can't advocate for yourself, that can even make you feel like you don't really know what anyone's saying, because you don't understand the language, which we can use different language. But I suppose I tend to go into science speak without even thinking about it. I suppose it's when you're day to day, but that's where it came from. And it was all about advocating for people being able to walk in and actually ask the right questions that give them the answers they desperately need, but don't realise they need it. So,
and this is your work through Emma the embryologist on Instagram, which is fantastic. Yeah, really good. And you share some amazing stuff. And this is, I think we're very aligned here in terms of awareness and education is so important. Have you seen a big change in terms of, so now that you're having more conversations with patients, are they far more informed? Are they kind of challenging you thoughts and processes from the clinics more?
Yeah, I mean, definitely from I suppose, because I'm in front of them quite a lot, then I expect to be challenged. I urge the conversations. I want them to ask the questions. I don't know what it's like. I don't know if everyone else is finding it in other clinics. I think so. I think the biggest change I've seen is what you guys are doing, is in the men being involved. And that for me is, especially in the last sort of 3-4 years, is having, it used to just be a conversation with a female who was scared, actually quite alone. And now I am definitely sat down with a couple and the men are much more engaged, and you've made it less scary. And that is an incredible thing to see, because actually what you're doing is 100% making my job easier.
That's giving me goosebumps. I almost brought a tear to my eye.
I felt it right there.
It really is, because they are answering the calls now. They are starting to be, and actually having those conversations and making them involved. And also because of what we're trying to do, which is change the landscape of understanding that this isn't about just a woman. This is about an egg and a sperm, and there are two people involved, and everyone has an input into that embryo and what that embryo grows like. Being able to have those conversations. I mean, if you go back to when I started embryology, the men would turn up, pitch up, maybe do a sample, but I used to have a very, very similar narrative from every man with, I don't even know why I'm here. It's not my fault, it's hers.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that element of blame has gone as well, because we don't blame. There is no blame in this.
No.
This is
sometimes it's just unexplained, isn't it?
This is a shit situation to find yourself in. Like you say, no one skips through the front door of a fertility clinic. We don't expect you to. But it's for us to be able to help you. The dialogue has to be open, and the dialogue is more open now than it's ever been. And I think that makes this incredibly exciting. And I think the more we know about male infertility and the impact I can see now from a lab side of things where embryos grow differently, I think we're on the cusp of something pretty massive, actually.
Yeah.
Wow, and that's just brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's just amazing for us to hear that. But I was going to ask that question then. Is the fact that men are more engaged, they're self-advocating a bit more, they're doing the lifestyle and diet stuff, is that making a difference? So in terms of the way you're then processing sperm samples and what you're seeing, because obviously then if you've spanned 20 years with your career, we've also see the decline in sperm quality as well. But are you how much of an impact is this having in terms of the raw materials, the gametes that you get in the lab?
Oh, massive, like massive. I've seen since the advent of DNA frag and the understanding of what that does for embryo development and what we can do about that. And don't get me wrong, there's some things that we can't fix, some male factors that we can't fix, and we have to, again, that comes down for managing expectations. And if we can't fix it, but when you see when we used to see poor embryo development, when I talk about poor embryo development, I'm talking about embryos that almost grow completely normally up to sort of day 3, day 4, and then they literally fall off a cliff. Before that, yes, that just used to be an accepted part of IVF, and then you would do ICSI or you would do something else, or we were very limited on what we could do, and now we've got time lapse, we can see all this happening, and with the understanding of what when the sperm switches on the embryo genome on day 4, having a cycle of IVF now and seeing that happen almost initiates a massively important conversation of hold on a minute, don't do another cycle, let's get you back in and let's start talking to a urologist. Let's start talking to a male fertility. What I'd like to see is that we never did the cycle in the first place.
Absolutely.
Yes,
well,
absolutely.
that's
like
it's
music to my ears.
all about.
But that, unfortunately, we're in
the
between,
beginning.
I think, at the moment. But at least we're not ploughing into second, third, fourth
Repeat
IVF ICSI cycles doing the same thing over and over again. You will get the same outcome. Sometimes you won't, but sometimes if that is what is happening, then you will. So I would like to see in an ideal world. I mean, it's not an endless pot of money for anyone, and obviously the NHS is so chronically underfunded that I would like to see all of this happening before we even started creating embryos.
Well, that's really, really encouraging just to think about that process, because I'm a bit of a science nerd, as most people know. But, knowing that the paternal genome switches on after a fertilization process, and then that's the moment really where you're going to see whether things are going to happen from an embryology point of view, is incredibly exciting. And I think, just being able to see that on time lapse, and you as an embryologist go like, oh, hold on a minute, I think that could be potentially a paternal issue because we're not seeing what we'd expect to see. That really triggers through that multidisciplinary team sort of activity going, actually, hold on a minute, let me just talk to the gynecologist who may be talking to the patient, talking to the fertility nurse. We've got something here that we may have dismissed in the past, but now we've got a bit of knowledge. Let's just see whether we can have a relook at the guy and see what we can do. And I've seen that through my career as well, that what we can do when you have got poor gametes. There is some things that you can do because men are producing sperm all the time, but the quality of that sperm can change over time as well. Just like we can sort of optimize, sort of like the female stimulation cycle as well. So that's really exciting and really encouraging.
It's like anything, isn't it? It's what you put, not for everyone. And this isn't a blanket thing because obviously there are some really, really severe underlying male factor problems that you can't escape. Like, kids that have had mumps and had mumps or coitus and then end up sterile, chemo treatments and stuff like that. There is some things that we can't fight against, but there are also some things of what you put in is what you get out. And actually taking the time to invest in your lifestyle in the 3 months before you spend an extraordinary amount of money, whether it's yours or the NHS's, into IVF cycle, will actually definitely change your outcome. We've actually got a process in our lab which we've developed from lots of conversations with urologists and understanding male fertility and female age, and I'm a genetics expert, all of those things. We actually, at the end of a cycle of treatment, we've got a list of KPIs, so key performance indicators that everyone should be meeting in certain age groups, and we know what our lab is capable of doing in regards to culturing embryos. And if people don't meet those, we actually write down a whole report and we send it back to the doctor, and we go into a disciplinary meeting about them and say, well, why didn't they meet those KPIs? And that and then initiates a overall scale of what can we do about this? Let's start having a conversation of, does the doctor think maybe the stimulation was off? And they might make a comment and say, oh, well, actually, yes, her hormone level there didn't look quite right. But overall, it allows us to all come together and say that patient has come through for a cycle treatment and hasn't met our expectations of what we would expect. Why?
And that's starting that point of continual improvement, isn't it? It's looking at not only for that couple that may not have that successful outcome on the first cycle, but it's looking at re-looking and saying, right, what are all those factors that could contribute to that outcome that we saw, that we weren't necessarily expecting through all the guidance and help and support and all the diagnostics that you've done prior to stimulating that cycle and so forth. But that is really, really encouraging, because there's, as you can think about it, there's lots of high throughput clinics out there that don't have the time to do that properly. So, that's what I would look for in a clinic. If I was looking for a clinic, is saying who can actually provide that level of reassurance that they will look at every single thing, what's gone through the process. And we don't always get things right in life, and it's just about trying to, push that level of science, that level of knowledge, and trying to go back, counsel the patients and seeing if they can do something before they come through for another cycle, whether it's psychological assessment and reducing stress loads, look at lifestyle and optimizing that process before they're engaging in that next cycle.
But as a patient, what better way to show just how much you really care, that level of detail goes in, because like patients don't really have that much of an understanding of what you guys do. You do a sperm sample, eggs collected off, they just go off into that room and the magic happens, right? But to understand just the complex level of care that you have, that you go to that nth degree, for me that's so reassuring, because it's like, well, if I then was to go to round 2, you've at least again gone, well, you've actually looked at what is the issues or what might not be, etc. But you're reassured that actually there's it's a worthwhile investment to have a go at round 2, when it just feels like a shot in the dark. Why am I going to spend another 10 grand or whatever? Of course you want a baby and you've got every hope that it will work, but for me it always just felt like a bit of a roulette wheel, that you're just going to just bung all your cash on one number, and the odds of it coming in are quite slim. But this feels honestly, this is such a refreshing conversation today. It's so good.
Do you think it's happening enough though, Emma? I think you're quite unique as a clinic, and certainly your mindset and the team that you've no doubt built. Do you think this is going to spread? Do you think a lot of clinics are going to start following this path? And you've kind of hinted at the idea of actually assessing the man a lot more thoroughly before you even do a cycle. Are we heading that way?
I hope so.
Yeah, we hope so as well. But,
I hope so, but I think we're fighting against so many other variables. We're fighting against businesses and all of that. I hope that's the way we're going, because I think we could actually ultimately see a lot more success if we actually got it all right. It's like what I feel about you may have heard me talk about IVF and ICSI. If you sit in front of a couple that haven't had a single conception for 2 or 3 years and they've been actively trying and you can't find a reason for it, that fancy phrase unexplained infertility, which is just basically we don't know what's wrong.
Or we haven't tested
everything. Or we haven't tested everything.
Yeah, we haven't done the right test.
Why? So for me, doing IVF on those couples is actually using their £10,000 first cycle of IVF as a diagnostic treatment. I mean, that's not okay. If you've got a real concern that there is potentially a fertilisation issue here, ICSI is safe. ICSI is the most magical thing that's come out of the IVF revolution, in my opinion, in the last 30 years. And I would never do a cycle of IVF on a young couple that have been trying for 3 years just to find out if it worked, because they're the ones that end up with failed FERT. So it's about having those conversations. And yes, it may seem very aggressive, but what's the alternative? So you've got to, and it's just about judging all of that. But yeah, in an ideal world, we wouldn't be in an unexplained situation.
And just talking about kind of the embryology kind of environment in terms of kind of the people that are working, a lot of embryologists seemingly, from conversations I've had, and I don't want to say this is a generalisation.
Careful.
Yeah. I realise I'm on tricky territory. They're very egg focused, and obviously you said it right at the beginning here. You deal with gametes, sperm and egg, but there seems to be such a huge focus on eggs. And sometimes we speak to some of these trainee embryologists at some of these conferences. And, oh yeah, no, I really want to be in it. I'm not interested in sperm. Is that a thing in the community? Is it not so sexy or exciting to work on sperm?
So I think for us, when we deal with sperm, we're embryologists, right? So we're not. So I think it's really important to differentiate that there are people out there called andrologists that are very heavily sperm focused, and I would prefer not to be the person doing a full semen analysis on a man. I'd much prefer an andrologist to do it so that I can get their take on it, because they're doing it day in, day out. I actually really like sperm. I think they're awesome, and I think they're awesome cells. So, no, not from my generation, definitely, because I trained in both. So I did embryology and andrology as I came up through and now embryology has very much sidestepped into the expertise that is embryos. Yeah, and when we look at sperm samples, I'm looking at, I have got this sperm sample, I know exactly what it's going to be capable of doing or not doing, and I need to create embryos. Yeah. And that's on the day, right? So everything leading up to that point should have been done. But no, I hope that's not the case. I think, especially from the conversations I have at work, everyone is very, very focused on looking at that sperm sample that is going to be used on the day in those eggs. Yeah. And it's incredibly thorough, because you can't get it wrong.
No. Well, yeah. In your role, when you're receiving those eggs and you're receiving their sperm, from the professionals and the people that are handing it over to you, that's your mixture, isn't it, for making that baby, making that cake, and you want the best ingredients possible to give you the best options, through that process. So,
what does it feel like when you fertilize an egg? What do you remember your first one you did? Like how?
I suppose it depends what you mean by fertilise. There's obviously different routes to doing it. I remember my first ICSI. Yeah. My first ICSI actually made a baby, which was I'm going back too many years.
It's making you smile 17. Already, isn't it?
I'm a bit weird. I sit at home. I'm going to tell you far too much about how strange I am.
Come on, bring it out.
I sit at home if I've been at work all day and I've done all the ICSIs that day. So say I've done, 4 ICSI cases and I was responsible for those ICSI cases. I will sit at home at 9:00 at night and check the time lapse and see what's happened. Because you can start to see the signs of fertilisation about 6 hours after you've done it. Okay. There's things that happen, and you can start to see them. And I will, before I go to bed, I will press play and just have a quick check-in on everyone in the lab. So weird.
I don't think it is weird. I don't think it is weird whatsoever, because it's such a level of responsibility.
But you're so invested.
But you are invested.
You're so invested. And I've spent all day, and actually I just want to make sure it's all going okay. And it's like, so I will check them before I go to bed at night.
It must be a magical feeling seeing...
Yeah,
knowing that you've done that.
It still blows my mind that actually we can do this. And I know exactly how it all works, and it still blows my mind.
Yeah, it's still magic, as you say, isn't it? Really,
so just going back to you talked about the paternal genome and kind of that sort of day 3, day 4 embryo kind of development. What are the kind of, as an embryologist in the clinic, you're receiving a sample from a man, what are the kind of red flags for you? When are you kind of seeing a sperm sample thinking, hang on a minute, we need to have a conversation here? Is it just about the embryo development, or is there other stuff that you're going to be picking up on?
No, so we do send, we normally see we have to have a semen analysis either from an andrologist, or we'll do one in-house before we even attempt treatment. So we know, because that would be, that's catastrophic, having eggs and no sperm. And that has happened to me, where we've had someone that for some reason has never had a semen analysis come in many years ago, and on the day was completely azoospermic, which is no sperm at all. And I had 15 eggs in the lab and no sperm. And actually, in that situation, what this guy had done, and I think this can really touch on your listeners, is he was so anxious about not being able to perform on the day that he went off and got himself a testosterone injection, which feeds into what we call the hormonal feedback loop, and it turns it off. So any guys listening, please don't do that. If you're worried, freeze a sample, because we're here to do that. But no, so on the day, like, there's the first thing I would look at, if I'm completely honest with you, is so we get the guy to do a sample, and then we'll get a form filled in just to give a few details. Is how long has he abstained? Because we should talk about abstinence a bit more. There should be no abstinence. You should be ejaculating really frequently. We are mammals. End of conversation.
Yep, job done.
None of this 5, 6 holding on to it till your wife ovulates. However you get it out, every couple of days you should be ticking it over, because actually it really helps with testicular function. So the first red flag to me is someone that's written number 7 or 8 days abstinence. I know then that I'm going to be dealing with a sample that is potentially suboptimal and therefore not representative of their own fertility.
Or their true potential, I suppose.
So you're looking at things like volume. If the volume is really, really high, you've definitely potentially got a prostate thing going on. If it's really low, then there's could be a retrograde where it goes backwards. So all these little things we're looking at, but ultimately movement, shape, how many there are, and if anything's outside of what we consider normal parameters on that very brief sperm analysis, we will refer straight back to the doctor for a urology assessment.
Yeah, and that doesn't always happen, does it, really, in a lot of the clinics that's there? So, having that sort of referral pathway, just to say, right, okay, there might be something not quite right here. It needs a bit more thorough investigation, because that could really, strike some red flags and something that could be corrected medically. There may be something medically wrong, as we know. We know that there's a lot of conditions like varicocele, hydroceles, and various other things. Could be prostatic issues, could be hormonal issues that just need investigating a little bit further, just beyond a normal semen analysis. And a semen analysis is a proxy, isn't it, of something that's
you can also see white cells,
right.
and if you're seeing a load of white cells in a sperm sample, you've got to start thinking about getting a culture on that and getting some infections screening done and stuff like that. So
you may need antibiotics or something like that if you've got a slight infection that's going on. So there's a whole host of things, but as a proxy, it's a good start. It's a very good start. But if there's something not quite right, then we've got to go and do a few further tests and refer out, I think, probably a bit more proactively than what clinics have been used to in the past.
Yeah, I think medical history as well, right? You've got to give everyone's got a context. And stop trying to put people into a bucket that you want them to fit into, and just accept that everyone's got their own context. And actually a lot about people's medical history and how they've ended up sat in front of you is going to tell you a lot about the potential for them as a couple to reproduce.
And we've spent a lot of time trying to tease out what are the really good questions, like the big Q&A of what sort of the person, the medical history, the lifestyle history, what they do for an occupation, what they eat, what they drink, all of these things could have a massive impact on their fertility health. And it's if you can do that screening correctly up front, and it drives awareness, it drives education, and it asks you, then going to ask you the right questions. Is there anything I can do before you take care of my gametes that I can help you with in that process? Because we know we're having trouble, in conceiving naturally, but what can I do? And we get the questions all the time, don't we?
Absolutely.
What can I do to improve things? And it's not just about taking supplements or things like that. It's about the whole picture, the whole person, the whole mental picture, as well as the medical history and what we do.
And this comes back to your consultations and the fact that you're actually talking to them. So if you're seeing a suboptimal semen analysis or a 7-day abstinence, you're having those conversations with them, aren't you?
So we take them right back to basics and talk about frequent ejaculation and all of that.
So important.
Screening,
that's why we've got the portal, isn't it? We created that free portal purely to highlight these things, so that if they get to the point where IVF is necessary, hopefully there's a bit more preparation, so that at least when they come to people like you, you're dealing with better ingredients, so to speak, to help your job and hopefully have the success, isn't it?
Or even just better knowledge before going into that process. It's going to make expectations of what's going to happen so much more easier to convey and isolate sort of things that could be improved and before they even go through that process, that they need your expert help to get over the line.
Can we talk about some of the other fantastic expert things that happen in the lab?
Yeah.
You weren't sure there. You were looking at
what is he going to ask?
What is he going to ask? Is it going to be personal or is it going to be,
Well, I know obviously you're the queen of kind of PGTA. I know we've had conversations before when you've joined our support group about embryo grading as well.
Yeah.
So I think kind of just thinking about that whole embryo scenario, when are you suspecting the sperm? How do you grade? When is PGTA appropriate? And all of these kind of things. Again, it's all the myths and education stuff. There's a lot there to unpack.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on what clinic you're in and what the culture system's like. This comes back to what we were talking about before we started this, about having the right questions to ask your clinic about what the embryo development rates are like in that lab, because it is very different clinic to clinic. So I personally don't deal with anything but blastocysts in the lab. I think anything that goes on before then, if you're giving the embryos the right environment, what will be will be. You can't, putting a day 3 embryo back, it isn't going to increase your chances. If it's going to work, it's going to work. The only reason to put a day 3 embryo back in my mind is
it's the only one.
It's the only one.
Yeah.
And there's an emotional need to transfer. And that's fine. That is 100% fine. But what we learn about allowing embryos to grow, especially a group of embryos growing, is exactly what we've just pointed out. Is there a male factor going on here? And all of those things you do not see until the embryo takes over its own genetic control, which is sort of mid to end of day 4. So we start on day 0 is egg collection, day 1 is fertilization, day 2, 3, 4, 5 is when you start to see the blastocyst form. Now the blastocyst is the entity that it's called the pre-implantation embryo. They're still inside a shell. And then they get themselves bigger. Imagine like a balloon blowing up. They're actually trying to hatch out like a chicken egg. And they have to do that. And that process of expansion and hatching takes anything between 12 and 48 hours. It depends on what the embryo is doing. I think the misconception is that grade is everything. It is not. We are human beings in a lab grading embryos. And I think what I would like to see is buckets, good, average and poor. Because I think we'd all put the embryos in the right buckets, but we might not all use the same numbers and letters. And what's really more important than any of those letters and numbers is what day did that embryo achieve the development pattern of blastocyst formation. A day 5 average quality embryo, so let's say what we call a 4BC or a 4CC, will make you pregnant a much higher rate than a day 7 4AA. Because it's reached the milestones at the right place. And you've got to think about the correlation between developmental potential, how they get there, genetic competence, male factor input, all of those things. We know that regardless of what the letters and numbers are given, actually the development is far more important. So when I'm looking at embryos and say I've got a group of embryos on day 5, I do grade them because it's a language that we use to speak to other embryologists and but ultimately I also press play on the video and I'm looking about how they got there and did they do anything unusual in their development stages that would make me deselect them because that doesn't correlate with high pregnancy rates. So that's if you're not having PGTA. So if you are having PGTA, which is when we do the embryo biopsy and testing, that also happens at the blastocyst stage. And we wait for embryos to be really advanced. So we may do, for the same patient, we may biopsy some on day 5, some on day 6, and some on day 7, depending on when they get there. We don't determine when we do it. I'm literally, my life is governed to by when an embryo grows.
All development.
And sit there and go, come on, it's 4 o'clock, let's go.
Switch on, wake up.
So then we would take a small amount of cells from those embryos before we put them in the freezer, and then we send those cells for testing to correlate for genetic competence. And as we know, as women get older, the egg age determines there is a higher number of what we call aneuploid or abnormal embryos forming. It does come from the female 95% of the time. So embryo, when we're dealing with embryos, for me, it's all about the blastocyst. But I think what I would love to myth bust is that grade is everything. It absolutely isn't. The journey is so important, which is why I'm a huge time-lapse advocate, because I don't think you can have any understanding of that journey unless you can watch them grow.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it, for guys out there who are, receiving numbers, letters, and so forth about the genetic competency, and it's normally secondhand, isn't it, by the partner? So the female partner's getting all the information, relaying it to the guys, and the guys are going like, I've no idea what this number is, and is it going to be viable? And should that be selected for embryo? Putting back and transferring and things like that. And I think just myth busting now is really, really important. So to talk about the development process from an embryology point of view and being more important than the number and the letter that is associated with it, it's that conversation I think that we need to sort of understand, because I think we'll process it a little bit better if we know the development isn't as what we would normally expect. These are, as you say, the buckets, low average, lower than average, and good from what we see. I think that language that we use is so important to just process and say, okay, I understand what you're saying, and understand that it might not take, but we'll give it the best shot if we're going to do an embryo transfer over that.
But I think the couple gets really hung up on those gradings, because I know we did. We had like day 3, all of ours bar 1 were high grade. We were like, we're in. This is it. We're good. Yeah. And come day 4, day 5, ours collapsed. We had nothing to really work with other than the hit and hope transfer that we did have. But we were so focused on the grade. This is good.
You got to remember, when was it graded? So there's a grading chart out there, and I'm not going to give it any credit because I actually want it removed from Google Images. There's a grading chart out there that puts so we start with a number, right? We start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That number doesn't correlate to grade. That's just how big the embryo is and how expanded and how big the balloon's gotten. And then we use A's, B's, C's and D's. And I've seen this grading chart that says a 2AA is to be discarded. Was that at 8 o'clock in the morning? Because I tell you what, that 2AA at 4 o'clock in the afternoon will be a 5AA. Because they're developing, they're growing all the time. You're dealing with something that is changing constantly.
Over time,
So actually, when was that embryo graded is the question that we should all be asking. The grades,
really important.
It's really important. But when did you look at that embryo? Because I can look at an embryo at 8 o'clock in the morning and tell my colleagues that, that embryo is quite early and probably needs a bit of time. But we do another check at 12 and we do another check at 4, because by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you've got a completely different entity.
Yeah. So maybe we should remove that, really, those letters and numbers, and listen to the embryologist about the development of that thing. Because if you have got, time lapse, you will know what that looks like. So you can characterize what that development process over time looks like, rather than a fixed number at a particular time. It's only a snapshot. That number in the letters is a snapshot, but we don't necessarily know what time or date that was done.
And it's really important to say that, a day 5 embryo, I do so much genetic testing. So a day 5 embryo that reaches the blastocyst stage on day 5, which is anything between 112 and 120 hours, that's what we call it in time lapse, has a 10% higher genetic normality rate than a day 6 embryo that takes all that time to get there. Wow. Because development correlates to genetic competence.
Over time.
So I just think there's so much. I think I understand why people get fixated by it, but I don't know how to get that message across, that there's so much more that goes into it than just
this podcast.
This podcast. And doing what you're doing on your socials.
We're busting myths, aren't we? So letters and numbers, maybe let's forget about it. It's only a time shot. It's a time.
And can we touch on ICSI and male factor, if this is all right? And maybe again, this is a bit controversial, because we've had Jonathan in here, and I know you've worked so closely with Jonathan for years, and kind of, he said, ICSI was almost the death of andrology because it's seen as a bypass for male factor. Kind of what is the viewpoint in labs and amongst embryologists around the use of ICSI and the if you've got poor quality sperm, what's the kind of all the thought processes that go on there? Again,
I suppose it comes back to what we were saying earlier: is why is the sperm quality poor? And if we've done every investigation going and there's nothing else we can do, then ICSI is our only thing that we can do. But should we be? I actually am a huge ICSI advocate, and I do understand what Jonathan's saying. I actually, if I had my way, would do ICSI on everyone, because I actually think that you have far more control over the embryos. You can time everything really well. You get them in the time lapse. You get to see everything. I think there's so many benefits to ICSI, but I don't think it should be used as we won't do any more investigations because we've got ICSI. That might help 10% of people. It might overcome some of the medium level DNA frags, but ultimately what you should be doing is investigating people first before, so that you've got that right. I actually don't think ICSI for me is just an incredible tool to create embryos really, really, really safely, really well, but it shouldn't bypass the bit that goes before, because it's still the same sperm going in the egg.
Yeah, and I think this is the big question mark for me, is that when you do get a sperm sample, there's millions of sperm cells in that sample. So which one do you pick?
Sometimes there's millions. So you have to prep that sperm, because you have to get it out of the semen anyway. So that will remove quite a large fraction of the non-motile fraction, because you either swim it out, which you obviously only the stuff that's moving swims out, or you use a zymer, or you do a gradient, whatever method you're using, you're ultimately splitting it from the semen. We then dilute it right down, because we have to be able to see those sperm cells really clearly, and we put them in something called PVP, which is polyvinyl propiondiol, and that's like a glue for sperm, so it slows it down, because actually they are bloody fast. If you
Well,
try and catch
yeah,
them.
the motility on sperm
They
is
are
unbelievable
so fast.
under
If you want to see
microscope.
it on, I think I just did a reel on Instagram, and it's like got a picture of sperm moving, and it's like, whoa, they're like, they look like ants. So we have to slow them down, and the reason we slow them down is firstly so we can handle them and catch them, but also once you get right up to high power magnification, you can actually see them really, really clearly. So we would look at them at like 400 times, and then we're looking for their head shape, their midpiece, acrosome, tail, movement, how they're moving, how they're progressing, all of those things.
Yeah.
And very quickly, what an embryologist will do is they've already spoken to the person who's prepped the sperm that day, so you know whether you're dealing with a very poor sample, and you know whether you're going to need to have quite a lot of time with that sample or not. And very, very quickly, you will assess probably 20 or 30 sperm and know very quickly what level of normality you can get from this sample. And that's exactly what you do. You pick the best out of the whole sample and put one into each egg.
I'd love to see that.
Come on in.
Come
on in.
I
Yeah,
really
of
would.
course you can.
Honestly, I mean,
love to see
it's
it.
an education
It's
and a
really
half.
cool.
It really is
Yeah,
cool.
it
When you
blows my
see all
mind.
the ICSI rigs and how everything works, it's
It's
just
a bit like playing the
amazing.
PlayStation. It's brilliant.
Honestly, honestly, it's just. I mean, I just love it.
I would
It's
really
just
love
like
to
the
come in.
science
I'd love
stuff.
to
Yeah,
see
of
it
course you can.
Microsoft.
You're more than welcome.
That'd be
Come on
great.
in.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
It's really good. It's but yeah, so an ICSI can take 20 minutes if you've got, like you've said, millions of sperm, and it's very straightforward.
Yeah.
The longest ICSI I ever did took me 7 hours.
What?
My goodness. Yeah.
How come?
Testicular retrieved sperm,
and then
a
you
lot
need
of
to
it,
process
and then
it.
I had to plate. So you have to go through multiple. You have to go through the whole sample to find. I had to find 10, I think.
That's incredibly hard. Is
Yeah.
You know, I know, you know, having talked to urologists and embryologists that are doing microtesy, and you're literally searching. For,
Yeah.
through
And you
about-
can be searching
you
for.
can be searching for a
It-
very long
It
time.
can make you. You actually normally do it in a tag team situation because it can be incredibly hard to
and
try and
it's
search
just
and
a
search and
strain
search,
on your
yeah.
eyes and the light and everything else as
Yeah,
well. So
yeah.
it's incredibly challenging and difficult. But once you see the outcomes of it, it's
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
It is.
we know guys that have had microtesies and literally just 9 sperm have been found, and they've gone on to have their own biological child
I know,
that
it's
they
amazing.
thought was impossible. So
Yeah.
Which is
And
ICSI,
being
right?
told that
Yeah.
they
They're
won't be able to have children.
with the
Yeah.
microtesy is one thing, but ICSI being invented in 91, 92 is just insane.
It is insane.
It's
isn't
it's
it?
changed the landscape completely.
yeah.
Yeah.
What about because obviously embryologist, you're perhaps receiving the sample from the guy. What about the men's rooms? Because this is something we talk about a lot.
Yeah,
And actually,
yeah.
I've seen the men's rooms at the Eve Well, and they're very nice. They're very, very well thought out.
I suppose, like 20 years, I have gone from working somewhere where you were asked to go to the disabled toilet and just get on with it, which in my young years I didn't really understand, to rooms where I understood that it was all too loud. And now I'm in a place where actually we're incredibly respective of the fact that this is a massively overwhelming scenario. I do always try and crack a joke because I do really feel for people, like especially they look, like I think what is a really good take-home message is we've seen it all before, right? There's nothing you can say to me that
Nothing
hasn't
new.
been said.
Yeah.
And actually, I really don't want you to be scared because, and I think that also to take away this myth, we are not hovering behind the hatch waiting. We're really not.
No.
I think people think that we're just sat there waiting.
Thanks for covering that up. That is exactly what we feel like.
No.
And I think that's because we don't necessarily know what's going on the other side of the hatch.
Yeah, we're actually
isn't
really
it?
busy.
You're getting on with
other
things.
stuff to do.
No,
So
we're not just waiting for
We
things.
don't actually think about it
hot.
too much, I suppose. And I think there's also a predominant problem that embryology is 90% female female
Team.
career,
Yeah.
and it's my team is 100% female. But I suppose if I can alleviate any of the fears, we're literally not waiting for you to finish
you're
your
not
sample.
bothered.
We're not timing you.
Yeah.
We actually would much prefer you to come out and say, I'm really struggling, can I go for a walk, than to stay in there and get so worked up. Because, I mean, it must be awful. But our
it's an alien
rooms, I'm
environment.
hoping, I mean, our rooms are soundproofed, they're quiet.
Yeah.
We always make sure that if we have got someone producing, all the doors to the labs are shut. We don't tend to converse in corridors and stuff like that because it can be really off-putting. And we've got all the material that hopefully will help. But
Yeah.
You know, there is also the option that you can produce off-site. You don't need to produce in a clinic. I think that's a real, maybe we should myth bust that you can produce off-site if you would feel more comfortable. The only thing we ask is that you bring it in with your ID so that we can do all the cross-checks that we need to do.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And then
And
it's
within a time frame.
and about an hour, hour
yeah,
and 15, and it's kept warm. So just in your pocket,
Yeah.
it's fine.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
No, it's an important thing to do. Yeah, and I think this is one of the big sort of things for us and for the guys out there. You know, don't overstress, you know,
No.
coming into a clinic and providing a sample. It's
Yeah.
not the real, you know, it's not what you'd expect in the normal bedroom sort of scenario. However, it is an important thing to do, you know, and just as long as you manage carefully, you'd be okay.
And also,
Actually
I
be okay.
think if you do need any like lubricants or anything, please ask the lab team, because we'd much rather use something that we know is embryo friendly
Embryo
than
and
you
sperm
bring your
friendly.
own stuff
Yeah.
in that is actually going to be quite detrimental. A lot of the stuff you can buy as lubricants in pharmacies and clinics have got spermicides in them,
Yeah.
so it can
So
actually
kill
be
the
really,
sperm.
they'll kill the sperm. So we'd much rather give you what we've got that we know.
I didn't realise there was something you could use. To be
Yeah,
fair.
you could just use
Yeah.
embryo oil. We use the oil that's in the lab because we know it's completely safe to use in culture situations. So you would just give someone some oil, which is the same as a lubricant, really, to help.
It's not 3-in-1 or WD-40, is
No,
it?
no, it's not that.
That's a bit
No.
aggressive, though, isn't it? It's a bit hard to crack
It's
it up.
possibly the most expensive lubricant you'll ever come across. But yeah, so we're more than happy to provide that. But also, if you are really struggling, I would always say freeze a sample. I think this also, let's myth bust that.
Yeah.
Frozen sperm is fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. Like it works really well. It's something we're very capable of doing. And I'd much rather you had a sample on the day than threaten not having a sample on the day.
I think that's another important thing, isn't it? It's part of that conversation right at the beginning. You know, I mean, right at the beginning, you'll have a sperm analysis first of all to make sure everything looks okay. But you know, if you are really getting stressed about providing a sample on the day of egg collection and so forth, because I mean, it's a nightmare, isn't it, for guys as well as the partners that are going through the process. By being able to have that backup is really important, I think, for not only for you guys in the lab, but also that mental stress is almost half removed. And
it's definitely different people.
You know, it'd be great to have a fresh sample on the day, but don't worry, we've already got your
it's fine.
samples, so we've got it banked. We'll look after you for you.
Yeah, because I look back at like my cycle, and I remember Katie getting wheeled down to theatre to have her embryos removed, and bless the embryologist's heart, she said she'll be back in 20 minutes. So I'm like, that for me, that's like, I've got to be out there. I need to be back in the recovery. I need to be with her. Yeah. And so those sort of processes for me are like that added a huge amount of like pressure. I remember sitting in the room for the first time for egg collection on the day, crying.
Yeah.
Absolutely in bits about it, the whole experience. So actually, if you could, if it's actually okay to freeze it.
Yeah, it's fine.
And also on that note is potentially you could have a sample done, have a DNA fragmentation done to verify that, and also freeze some of the sample. If you know that's come back good, you're quite like sure that that's okay. Whereas on the day, you might have got ill, they might be run down, there might be other things that are factors that can be causing for, you know, you might have not intentionally abstained for longer than you'd like to because of various reasons. And then you
there's always an option.
It's like your little insurance policy, isn't it? That you're
I
free
quite like
banked,
the idea of
and you
it.
go like, okay, we'll try and give a fresh sample on the day, make sure, and you know, it's you guys that can actually assess it on the day and say, oh, actually, I think we might go back to the bank
we can
sample.
do that. Yeah.
So to give yourself a little bit more.
We've actually got quite a big time window in the morning. It's like from the time the eggs are collected to when we need to make them into embryos is about 4 hours.
Right.
So, and even then you can push it to like 6 hours. And the reason we do that is eggs are collected at 36 hours after trigger, in most clinics, in most scenarios. There are variations to that rule, but not many. And then the men would hopefully produce at that time as well, or around that time. And actually we try and start making embryos around 40 to 41 hours post-trigger, because that's when they would naturally have ovulated. So we're trying to catch them at their most mature, optimum point of what is in keeping with what you would normally ovulate around that time. Sure. So you've got quite a big amount of time. And actually a sperm sample takes 25 minutes to prep. So we've got time.
Yeah. There's no actual rush to, interesting.
Really interesting, isn't it? Really.
What's is there anything exciting new coming up in kind of the embryo world that kind of excites you? 20 years in, it's kind of like no.
Yeah, AI is definitely starting to make a bit of a big play. There's definitely got we're going to be trialing something called SIDS, which is a sperm selection AI tool, to see how that helps. It's quite hard. I mean, our fertilization rate with ICSI is incredibly high, so it might help some places more than others, if that makes sense. Again, this comes back to what we were talking about and knowing the fertilization rates in your clinics and stuff like that. There's definitely going to be a big push towards AI overlaying to embryos just to help embryologists do all the grading quicker, because it's so time laborious, and they've definitely now got systems in place that can help us get through the day-to-day stuff, and then allow us just to do the expert bit at the end and make sure we can see everything. So I think that's all coming. But for me, I think the most important thing from my perspective that's coming is trying to change the narrative a bit. Trying to change the narrative
right
to
at
how,
the beginning.
so trying to change the narrative to how you choose your clinic, what you should be asking, what the big factors are. I would really like to just open the doors to this and make this a complete
and what
open.
can couples do to prepare themselves as much as possible
absolutely.
to be as
open the
fertility fit
conversations
as possible? Yeah.
And what should they be asking them? What should a couple ask their
So I
clinic?
think everyone, like I would say a couple of things. Unfortunately, the HFEA are 5 years behind on their data. So, and there are multiple reasons for that I won't go into, but it is very, very hard for a couple at the moment to navigate themselves through success rates, because that isn't up to date. We have all got our success rates from 2021, 2022. We have to, because it's all we've got
them.
regulation and we've got to report them. So any clinic should be able to ask what your current success rates are. But I'd like to go a bit further than that, because lots of people base their success rates on live birth per embryo transferred. And actually what I'd really like patients to ask is, in my circumstance, with my demographic, with my AMH, with my partner's situation or my donor sperm or whatever the situation is, what is my chance of creating embryos that give me the opportunity to have a live birth?
Yeah.
Because the conversations that need to be had is that not everyone ends up with embryos at the end. And I'd also like people to start thinking about their future. I want people to start to remember what it all looked like when they started this really exciting journey about becoming parents.
Yeah.
Because you can get lost in this absolute desperation to have a baby. I get it. I've lived it. I remember it. But what I don't want to see is a 38-year-old couple, woman, whatever, in whatever situation, going into a clinic and having treatment and an embryo put back and having a baby, and no one having a conversation with her about having a pause and doing another cycle of egg collection there. Because if she comes back to you in 2 years' time because she would like a sibling,
the risks.
she's 40 and it's going to be 10 times harder. So what I'd like to see a lot more of is family building and those conversations and that real honest approach of, I know I do get how much you just want to crack on because you've been trying for so long, but I also want you to foresee your future and allow us to at least have a conversation about family building.
Yeah.
I think it all comes back to this awareness and education, doesn't it? And it's opening up all of these conversations.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it goes right back to almost the beginning of this conversation. If we do all of this and all the preconception care for both the men and the women, your job's going to be a whole lot easier.
Yeah.
People are going to have better chance of success, or they're going to conceive naturally, and then we've all done a great job.
Yeah. 100%. And actually, let's go there. So conceiving naturally, actually our responsibility, I think, with a fertility clinic is if you start to identify factors that can be worked on, we should be sending couples away, and we do, to go and have a conversation with Jonathan, to go and have a conversation with Melanie Brown, nutritionist, because actually you might just give them the skills that they need to conceive naturally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or go and get that varicocele repaired.
Or go and get that varicocele repaired and then conceive naturally. Like those stories, we need to
got
start.
one.
Exactly. We need to start talking about those, because a fertility clinic should not be that you're suddenly walking through those doors and you're in the system. A really good fertility clinic actually is there to assess you as a couple. And actually our main aim, actually, it sounds really weird, is for you not to have IVF, because that is...
Absolutely.
That's
what we should be
ultimate
doing.
care, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's ultimate care, treating, patients
Assess, treat,
as
optimise.
individuals, as human beings, and trying to do the right thing for other human beings. So, well
I
done.
think that's a lovely note
That's
to end
a
on.
great closure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Emma, thank you so much for coming
You're very
today.
welcome.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been a great conversation, and I think there's so much more that we could have talked about and haven't touched on. I think we could be here for days.
Yeah, definitely.
But no, we love your work. We love what you do,
Thank
and
you.
I actually love that mindset that you have.
Yeah.
And we fully support everything you're saying.
Oh,
And,
thank you.
um,
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being awesome.
Letting me bang my drum.
No, absolutely.
I think a round of applause is
A
needed.
big round of applause. Big round of applause.
That's a fantastic one.
So just to close the podcast, Emma, where can we find you for those that don't know where?
So I'm the lab director of the Evewell Fertility Clinic. We've got 2 clinics, one in Harley Street and one in Hammersmith, just by the Hammersmith station. And I'm also on Insta as Emma the Embryologist. where you are more than welcome to DM me. I do try and get back to people, and there is quite a lot on my grid now. I'm hoping that
your grid's awesome.
My grid's is getting bigger, so I'm trying to. If I have more time, I will put more on there. But I try and tackle upcoming things and myth bust. It's generally what I spend my
just
time
like
doing.
us tackling fertility together. That's it.
Yeah,
so it's brilliant.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.
Awesome.
Bye bye, everyone.